So it was more to control emotions. It's a surprise for everybody, except maybe to me.
The edit protected Alcaraz. Ferrero just stopped protecting him too. That is the part that hits different when you go back and watch My Way now. Knowing what you know, knowing how December 2025 ended, knowing that the man standing across from Carlos in that conversation scene had already been fighting a losing battle for 2 years before Netflix cameras ever showed up. The Ibiza footage made it in. The birthday party made it in. The Grand Slam celebrations, the Federer advice, the Nadal farewell, all of it made it in. What got quietly cut was everything that explained why 8 months after that documentary dropped, Ferrero was gone. He finally sat down and said it. Contract ultimatum. 48-hour window. A father versus coach power struggle that sources describe as the real spine of this whole story. Never once mentioned across 3 episodes of supposed unfiltered access. Patrick Muratoglu posted on Instagram that the signs were always visible. The tennis world went back and rewatched every Ferrero scene like detectives and found them everywhere. Subscribe and tell me honestly, did the documentary feel complete to you the first time, or did something feel missing? Now here is what was missing. Let us start with what Ferrero actually was before he was Alcaraz's coach, because that context is the part most people skip, and it is the part that makes everything that follows make sense. Ferrero was not a coach who needed the work. He was a former world number 1, a Roland Garros champion, a man who had lived inside the pressure of being the best player on the planet and understood, from personal experience, exactly what that pressure costs you. When Albert Molina, Alcaraz's agent, came to him and asked him to coach a teenage kid from Murcia, Ferrero did not say yes because he needed something to do. He said yes because the idea of building a player from scratch, with everything he knew from his own career, genuinely excited him. That distinction matters. He was not a hired hand, he was an architect who chose his project. And before he chose Alcaraz, he walked away from Alexander Zverev. Let that sit for a second. Zverev, top 5 player, Grand Slam finalist, one of the most physically gifted players on tour, and Ferrero left because he felt the professionalism was not there. He did not renegotiate. He did not lower his standards. He walked. That is who Alcaraz's father called when his son was 14 years old. That is who showed up at the academy in Villena and looked at this teenager and decided he was worth the investment. Ferrero has described those early days with a honesty that most coaches would never put on record. He said Alcaraz was shy, unstable, emotionally all over the place, very cocky with the wins, and then he'd complain if it doesn't go his way. A roller coaster, a talented, difficult, emotionally raw kid who needed someone with the patience and credibility to handle all of it without flinching. Ferrero did not flinch. For 7 years, through 4 Grand Slams, through injuries, through the pressure of being called the next Nadal before he had finished becoming himself, Ferrero was the fixed point. The man who held the structure together while Alcaraz worked out who he was going to be. What Netflix captured in My Way was the end of that stability, even if nobody watching realized it at the time. The 2024 season, on paper, was the greatest of Alcaraz's career. French Open, Wimbledon, back-to-back. A silver medal at the Paris Olympics. The youngest player in the Open era to win on clay, grass, and hard courts. He was 21 years old and he was playing tennis that made grown men who had watched the sport for decades stop and genuinely wonder if they were watching the best they would ever see. The joy on his face was not performance. That is the thing about Alcaraz that separates him from every other elite player in the conversation right now. When he is playing well, he looks like he cannot believe how much fun he is having. Djokovic wins and you see the relief, Sinner wins and you see the satisfaction. Alcaraz wins and you see a kid who just got away with something brilliant and wants to do it again immediately. That energy is his brand, his identity, his core competitive instinct. And Netflix understood exactly how to sell it. 3 episodes, clean arc, the French Open chapter, the Wimbledon chapter, the emotional close with Nadal's Davis Cup farewell. The documentary did what it was designed to do. It made you feel like you were seeing the real Carlos Alcaraz for the first time. Federer appearing to give him advice about finding joy in every city he visits. Agassi in a limousine in Las Vegas, telling him to pick Nadal's brain before it was too late. His grandmother singing at his birthday party. His brother Alvaro looking into the camera and telling him, with the bluntness only an older sibling can manage, that he would still get a slap round the head if fame went to it. It was warm, it was honest. It was, and this is the word that kept appearing in every review, authentic. Except there was a scene that did not fit that warmth. And that scene is the one everyone has been rewatching since December 2025. Ferrero and Molina, across from Alcaraz, raising concerns about the Ibiza trip, about the conditions in which he arrived at Queen's Club, about the time spent away from training when Wimbledon was weeks away. It was not a shouting match. It was something more uncomfortable than that. It was two men who had built their professional lives around this player telling him, on camera, that they were not sure he was taking the responsibility of greatness seriously enough. And Alcaraz sitting there, listening, not crumbling, not apologizing, not promising to change, just absorbing it and moving forward on his own terms. The world watched that scene and called it refreshing, evidence of a healthy team dynamic, proof that My Way was delivering on its promise of unfiltered access. Nobody treated it as a warning because nobody had reason to yet. Alcaraz went on and won Wimbledon. The system, whatever its tensions, was clearly working. When the Italian Open press conference came around in May 2025, a few weeks after the documentary released and the reaction had started building online, Alcaraz was asked about that scene directly. His answer is worth reading carefully, because it tells you everything about how he was processing the situation. I'm not going to say the fight, but the conversation we have, coach and player, we all have it. Whoever says they don't have it, they lie. I think that's the beauty, having mixed feelings, mixed points of view, at the end we go on the same path. Read that back, he did not say Ferrero was wrong, he did not say the concerns were overblown. He acknowledged the disagreement existed, reframed it as normal and even beautiful, and then described them as going on the same path. That is not a player who has resolved a conflict. That is a player who has decided the conflict does not require resolution on anyone else's terms but his own, his way. He said it without saying it. What the documentary never showed, what Netflix had no footage of because it predated the cameras, was where that instinct came from and how long it had been creating friction before anyone pressed record. Go back to February 2023. Alcaraz is recovering from injury and preparing to return on the South American clay swing. Ferrero, as he often did, decided not to join that leg of the tour, delegating the role to Antonio Martinez Cascales instead. Professionally, the decision made sense. Ferrero managed his schedule and Alcaraz had capable support. On the court, it worked too. Alcaraz won in Buenos Aires and reached the final in Rio. But within the team, specifically between Ferrero and Alcaraz's father, the decision did not land cleanly. Sources close to the situation described a heated argument. A father who felt his son's coach should have been present for a comeback from injury, and a coach who had made a professional judgment call and expected it to be respected. Nobody made a public statement. The season moved on. The titles kept coming. But that argument left a mark, and a year later, when the cameras arrived and started filming what would become My Way, the mark was still there. Invisible on screen, very visible to anyone inside the camp. The other moment Netflix could not show was what happened after Alcaraz's exit at the 2024 US Open. He lost earlier than expected, the first significant result that did not match the dominant narrative the documentary was building around him. In the days that followed, Alcaraz traveled to a Formula One event. Ferrero was against it. Alcaraz went anyway. It was not a scandal. It was not leaked or photographed in a way that caused controversy. But inside the team, it represented something that had been building for a long time, a player who had decided that his recovery and his downtime were his decisions to make, and that even the man who had coached him to 6 Grand Slams did not have final authority over that. The documentary framed Ferrero as the head voice of the tennis project. What was becoming increasingly clear, both off-camera and within the dynamic the cameras did capture, was that Ferrero was not the head voice in Carlos Alcaraz's life. He never fully had been. The family was always there. The father, the brother, the inner circle from Murcia that predated Ferrero and would outlast him. Ferrero was the architect of the tennis. The life was always going to be built by someone else. Then came December 16, 2025. Alcaraz posted the announcement on social media. No press conference, no joint statement arranged in advance with careful language on both sides. A post. The tennis world found out the way the tennis world finds out about most things now, by looking at their phone and stopping mid-sentence. The reaction was immediate and genuinely shocked. This was not a struggling partnership. This was not a coach who had lost the dressing room or a player who had been tanking matches. This was the world number one, fresh off the best season of his career. 2 more Grand Slam titles in 2025, back at the top of the rankings. Parting ways with the man who had been beside him for 7 years. Patrick Mouratoglou posted on Instagram within hours, and his words became the framing that most of the tennis world adopted for the next several days. It was a huge shock, huge for everybody. Nobody expected Carlos and Juan Carlos to break up. We really had the feeling that this collaboration was for life. This breakup shows that nobody knows what's happening behind closed doors. That last sentence, "Nobody knows what's happening behind closed doors," sent the tennis world straight back to my way. Not to rewatch the Grand Slam victories, not to revisit the Federer advice or the birthday party. Straight to the Ferrero scenes. Every moment where Ferrero's expression did not quite match the optimistic narration. Every line where his concern about Ibiza was presented as coaching friction rather than a fundamental disagreement about what this player was willing to sacrifice. Ferrero's own statement after the split contained one sentence that said more than the rest of it combined. "I would have liked to continue." 5 words, and they reframed everything. Because they confirmed what Mouratoglou had said. This was not mutual. Ferrero did not decide to move on. Ferrero was moved on. A 48-hour window to accept new contract terms that included a salary reduction, according to reporting from Spanish outlets. A man who had delivered 6 Grand Slams being given 2 days to decide if he wanted to continue on different financial terms. He did not accept, he left, and then, for 3 months, he said nothing publicly. When he finally sat down with Josep Pedrerol on El Cafelito in March 2026, the interview became the most important piece of tennis content released that year. Not because Ferrero was explosive or angry or desperate to settle scores, but because he was none of those things. He was calm, precise, a meticulous and structured analyst, his own description of himself going through exactly what happened with the particular clarity of a man who had spent 3 months processing it before saying a word in public. The contract mechanics he described were straightforward. Annual renewal that had always been automatic. This time, both sides entered active negotiations that failed. I was asking for certain conditions, and on their side, they were asking for others, and there was no understanding. That was the business version. Then came the human version. Ferrero confirmed, on record, what the Netflix edit had only allowed to surface in fragments. His vision of professional discipline and Alcaraz's approach to his career were not compatible at the level Alcaraz was claiming to target. He did not dress it up. His understanding of work and sacrifice is different from ours. And then the line that landed heaviest of all, the doubt that Ferrero had been carrying for years, now said plainly with nothing left to lose. It makes me doubt if like that he can become the best in history. That is not bitterness. That is a coaching philosophy, stated without apology. Ferrero watched Djokovic up close as a peer on tour. He knew what total commitment to becoming the greatest actually looked like. The diet, the recovery, the refusal to let any part of life compete with the obsession. And he watched Alcaraz, who has the talent to surpass everyone, choose a different relationship with that obsession. Not no commitment, not laziness. A different definition of what commitment means. Alcaraz had said it himself in the documentary almost casually. He does not want his life to be like Nadal's. He does not want tennis to be everything. He wants to enjoy the cities, enjoy the people, go to Ibiza when he needs to reset, and still go out and win Grand Slams. Renee Stubbs raised the question publicly after the split. Had Alcaraz lost discipline without Ferrero there? It is a fair question and an uncomfortable one, because the answer is not simple. Alcaraz won the 2026 Australian Open after the split, which gave his supporters instant ammunition. But Stubbs's point was never about whether he could win without Ferrero. It was about whether he could reach the ceiling Ferrero believed he had. The all-time record, the conversation with Djokovic's 24 slams, without someone in his corner who was genuinely willing to have the hard conversation about what that ceiling costs. Tony Nadal, the man who coached Rafael Nadal, who understands better than almost anyone alive what a player-coach relationship looks like when it is working at the highest possible level, gave his read on the split to Spanish radio. He said the reason goes beyond tennis. He noted that it appeared to be Alcaraz who made the decision, given Ferrero's statement. And then he said something that deserves more attention than it got. The player is the one who is paying, and he's usually paying to hear what he wants to hear. That line is the whole story. Not Ibiza, not the F1 trip, not the father-coach argument in 2023, or the contract breakdown in December 2025. The whole story is this. At some point, the player who was built by a system decided the system worked for him on his terms, and the man running the system had a choice between accepting that or leaving. Ferrero, being Ferrero, could not fully accept it, so he left, or was pushed. The result is the same. What My Way gave you was a documentary about a boy becoming great. What Ferrero's El Cafelito interview gave you was the documentary Netflix never made, the one about what greatness actually demands, told by the man who demanded it and lost the argument. The most striking moment in that entire interview came at the very end, when Pedrerol asked Ferrero directly, if Alcaraz called and asked him to come back, what would he say? Ferrero did not hesitate. In the bottom of my heart, I could not say no to Alcaraz. 7 years, 6 Grand Slams, a 48-hour window and a salary cut, and a social media post ending it all. And the man on the other side of that post still cannot say no. That is not a coaching relationship. That is something closer to what Tony Nadal had with Rafael, a bond that the business of tennis eventually breaks but never fully removes. The difference is that Tony Nadal's side of that story was written across 22 Grand Slams. Ferrero's side ends at 6 with the question still open. How many more could there have been, and at what cost, and who gets to decide what the cost is worth? Alcaraz has answered that question, his way. Whether that answer takes him to the top of the all-time list, or whether it leaves him as the most gifted player of his generation, who fell just short of the obsession that separates great from greatest, that story is still being written. Ferrero saw one ending coming. Alcaraz is betting on a different one. Drop your read in the comments. Do you think Alcaraz's way gets him there, or did he just cost himself the GOAT conversation the moment he showed Ferrero the door?